we speak like some crazy number, like 16,000 words a day. How many of those words actually connect with the person? We have to find ways to connect with people. And there's some different ways to connect with people. One is listening. Another one is finding common ground. Another one is making eye contact, body language. So finding ways to connect with people is essential, because I can say a lot of words to you, James, and I can sound eloquent and I can sound like I have it all together. But if I'm not making that heart-to-heart connection, you're not hearing me.
Hello and welcome to The Clear Voice, brought to you by Clear Career Professionals. I'm your host, James Groom. Today, the president of Clear is joining us, Michael Boese. Michael, welcome to the show and thanks for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me on again, James. It's a beautiful time of year in Texas. The March and April kind of time frame is where we get to see some of the springtime temperatures. Things are growing really well, and so we're having an amazing season down here. I did want to mention, I appreciate the city of Sunnyvale having me out there last couple of weeks and being able to work with their leadership team on 540 leadership. It's really a great opportunity to work with the city and help improve their overall culture and take their performance to the next level. It's an exciting time for me. I always say this on our guests, but this one's particularly, special. As you introduce him here, we'll talk more about our relationship and kind of how we got to know each other, but really looking forward to the program that we have today.
So am I. Today's guest is Darren Mann. Darren brings more than 15 years of experience managing high-risk and high-value projects as a project manager, and he is also the author of the book Rise Above Routine. Today, he works with professionals and organizations to simplify leadership concepts and help people grow through training, coaching, and speaking. Darren, welcome to The Clear Voice.
Thank you, James, and good to see you again, Michael.
Well, can you walk us through your career journey, your early days, and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, wow. That takes me back quite some time. But yeah, I started my career journey back when I was, I'd say about 23, 24, but I really got my first management position when I was 25. And that didn't go well, James, to be honest with you. I was a lead. I led a small team of about 2 people, and then I got promotion into a management role. But I didn't know how to make that shift from being a team lead to a manager, because I was now managing people and I couldn't do the day-to-day sort of work that I was doing before. That was my kind of introduction to management. So I left that management role and then I went into business analysis, and then after that, I got into project management. And project management was quite the career. I spent 15 years doing that, managing, like you said, high-risk projects, managing multi-million-dollar projects as well. The thing that I loved about project management was the leadership component of it, leading people, leading teams, helping teams to achieve a goal that was set for us in our project charter and our project plans, those kinds of things. About 3 years ago, I came into contact with John Maxwell's coaching program. And because I had such a desire for leadership, one of the things that I do every day is I read. I read about 30 minutes every day. And I've been doing that for about 15 years, I'd say. And I came across I was reading one of his books. And at the time, I was going for my MBA, and I was about the second term into my MBA. I just started reading this book by John Maxwell called No Limits. And at the end of the book, John talks about his coaching program. I dig into his coaching program and reach out to his organization, and then, make a long story short, become a John Maxwell coach. Now I had a decision to make. Do I continue with my MBA or do I continue with coaching? But coaching was much more a better fit. I loved coaching people and training and speaking and all those kinds of things. And so I became a John Maxwell coach, and I dropped out of my MBA program. And so that's where I'm at today, is I'm doing this full time for the last 7 months. Left my career of project management about 7 months ago, and I've been speaking, training, and coaching full time, like I said, for about 7 months now.
Coming out of the project management world, one of the things that I see leaders struggle with is not having a goal in mind. And that's one of the things that you said that, obviously as a project manager, you've got an end result, whatever that project is. Do you find as you're coaching people that sometimes those expectations in their career, their day to day, aren't as formulated as they might be if they were a project manager on a certain project?
I would say so. Being a project manager for as long as I was, one of the things that I learned to do from managing projects is actually managing and leading my life. It was a skill that I learned from managing so many projects is, how do I first lead myself? and manage myself. And I think that's one of the struggles that people have. Some people are all over the place. And so they hire me as a coach to help them sort of manage their lives and help them to get clear on their goals as well. So if you don't know your why, you'll be following someone else's why.
You and Michael knew each other growing up. Is it kind of interesting that you both ended up in the same kind of space, helping people elevate their leadership potential and get to the next level?
Michael and I have known each other since high school, but you never know where people are going to go in their lives. You know, we reconnected fairly recently. I think we've been kind of friends on Facebook for a while now. Yeah, it's interesting how we kind of cross paths again after all this time, after maybe 30 years, I guess. That's dating us a little bit, Michael.
Yeah. Well, Darren, it has been a long time. James, the other really cool thing was Darren and I got to play football together in high school. I think when we kind of draw back and I look at my experiences on those people I learned a lot of things from, I kind of remember some of our coaching staffs. And, Darren and I started at a high school that was a brand new high school. When we started playing sports against some other high schools, man, it was a really tough go trying to kind of build that program. But we had some coaches, I think that, early on, at least in my life, Darren, had some leadership impacts, even looking back that far. You talked about is maybe like the intentionality of how we lead and how we grow ourselves. In my experience over the years, people feel like, leadership is something that they do on a checklist. They'll read a John Maxwell book and then they'll check that check mark. Hey, I should just be, cruising along. And really, it's the intentionality of continually delving back into evaluating your self-awareness and kind of where you're at. Do you kind of see those same things in your circles?
Definitely. So one of the things that I think really helped me, Michael, when it comes to leadership, I told you about when I was 25 and I had that leadership failure. And so there's some things that I do now on a daily basis and some principles and practices that I have as well. So one of the things that I do is I reflect every day. And that reflection helps me to see, okay, what did I do today that was effective, that was ineffective? And so that helps me to sort of understand where I'm going and evaluate my experiences. So that's one of the things that I do. And another thing I mentioned is that I read every day. So read 30 minutes every day, but I'm also reflecting on that reading as well. Something else that I've incorporated is mentors, having mentors, coaches. I have a counselor. I have a support system around me that helps me to grow and develop, and that holds me accountable as well. As a leader, if we don't have people around us that support us, I would say like an inner circle. And an inner circle is like those closest to you, and then the outer circle is more associates. But if you don't have that inner circle, it's really hard to improve as a leader. That's the key to improvement. You can lead things, but if you want to lead them effectively, I think you have to have a team, a good support system around you. Jim Rohn said that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And so I think that's a key to leadership.
I don't see that talked about a whole lot. When you get promoted to a certain point, you're kind of out there on your own, and you may have coworkers in the organization that are on the same level as you, and of course you've got a boss and you've got followers. But you really need people outside of that circle that you can really talk to about what's going on and kind of bounce things off of them. And of course, it helps if they're more experienced and have lived life longer than you, because they probably will give you some good advice.
Yeah. And that's something that helped me as a project manager as well, is having alliances, having people that maybe weren't on my project, but had a lot of experience within an organization. That's one of the things that I would recommend to people in sort of the corporate world is having some alliances that some people you can lean on, not necessarily your peers, but people that are, in a higher level management position that you can reach out to, that you can get some support from. And that goes back to the inner circle thing, but this is more of supporting a particular initiative.
You mentioned your leadership failure at a young age. Can you kind of walk us through what you think brought that on? And when we're taking advice from somebody, we do want to talk to people who are successful and have had great achievements. But I almost think that the people that know what failure tastes like and have had an experience like that are more suited sometimes than somebody who may have never had a bad experience. I think there's a lot to learn from a failure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I was thinking about this as I was sort of reflecting before our session. A few things that I learned when I was 25 is I kind of grew up thinking that, or from the mindset that I had to do things on my own. I had to kind of figure it out. Keep at it until you figure it out. And so I grew up with that mindset. But when I was put into an unfamiliar situation where I was managing a team now, a larger team, it was unfamiliar. I didn't know. I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't know how to ask for help, James. That was the big thing that I experienced, is not being able to ask for help. I didn't have a support system around me at that time as well. I didn't have mentors and people that I could go to. The boss that I had at the time, he wasn't that approachable, and so I felt stuck. I really felt stuck. And so that was the first thing, not being able to ask for help. And I would say the second is not having a strong support system around me. I know a lot of leaders that struggle with that. They kind of get in a place where they don't have that support system and they don't know how to reach out and ask for help. That was the big learning opportunity that I had from that experience.
I think you referenced that as a worker, you were top of the line.
Yes.
Very capable in doing the work itself. And we have a lot of executives that listen to this podcast and that we deal with all the time. That's one of the biggest problems, is we don't want to overlook our top worker, but also we have to know that just because they're great at doing the job doesn't mean that they're going to naturally transition to that management field without any other help and be able to be as accomplished in management as they are as a worker. What advice would you have for executives that are trying to figure out who to promote, and they're looking at, some top workers, and they're looking at some people that may not be their top producers, but they may have some more management skills naturally?
My advice would be, make sure that you have some kind of a transition plan for them, because if they, like you said, James, if they're a top achiever, but if they don't know how to manage people and how to deal with people, that's what happened to me. Is I was a top achiever in my role, but when I moved into management, it's a different skill set. And so giving those managers the skill set and that time to transition and making sure that they have the support to transition into that management role, I think is key.
Michael, when you promoted into supervision the first time, was there a program for you? And if not, would you recommend that? How hard is that transition going from peer to supervising people that you were just buddies with?
I think there has to be definitely a plan for that. Luckily, when I was coming through in municipal government, there was kind of a plan outlined for when you got promoted, what you were supposed to do as far as training goes. And actually, the day I got promoted, I luckily was starting this class in supervision. It worked out well. But I think it goes kind of back to what Darren talked about none of us are authors of our own success without the other people in our lives that have helped us continue to grow and develop and become the leaders that we are consistently being. Having those crucial conversations with one another and making sure that you empower other people to have good input for you, and not always good input. It's really great to tell somebody that you're working close to or a mentor to say, hey, when I start making mistakes, please let me know. I'm still going to be hurt by that sometimes, but I want you to actually come and tell me so that I have the opportunity to grow. After I was promoted, James, I actually went to a couple of people that I was supervising that I trusted, that I'd worked kind of peer to peer with. And I said, hey, I know I'm the supervisor now, but I really want to empower you to come to me at the appropriate time when you see me starting to fail, when you see me starting to have some of those toxic leadership traits, or when I start leading for myself and not for the team. Please come to me. And I really empowered them to do that. That really worked well for me. It's something that I kind of continued to do throughout my career. Is anytime I went to a new team, I found a couple of people that I trusted or that I felt like would be able to have those honest conversations. And I went and empowered them up front so that I knew somebody was kind of checking me, that there weren't as many blind spots that were going to be compromising my leadership over a period of time.
Darren, you said that when you were in that position back in the day, that your boss wasn't somebody that you felt like was approachable. How can leaders understand that rapport between, especially a newly promoted supervisor and themselves, how important that is, and that ability to have those open, honest conversations is?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. Now, this particular manager was managing other team members as well. So he had a larger team, not just me. But I think it wasn't only on him. I have to take responsibility as well. So I think it was just a lack of experience on my side. And I thought I had the experience as being a team lead, and I thought that would translate, but I didn't really understand what I was getting into. I didn't understand the role I was getting into. Maybe that was something that wasn't laid out clearly to me, is the expectations of this new role and what it would entail, what it would take to be a manager. So I think that was maybe a fail on his part and maybe a fail on my part, is not asking the questions of what does this entail? What am I getting myself into? But I made a lot of assumptions. I was young. I think that's how I would answer that.
Darren, I deal with a lot of leaders, and I'm sure it's probably similar for you, that say, I just don't have time to do this or that, or I don't have time to have these conversations, or they fall back on that. I think we all have the perception of a lack of time, particularly if you're on a busy project or if you're in a very high stress leadership role. How do you coach people on understanding that the time dynamic and really setting those priorities for what's important now can really set them up for success as a leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. Time is always, I think, an issue for leaders. It's always something that we're going to deal with as leaders, not having enough time to do things in the day. One of the things that I've seen and I've helped other leaders with this is setting priorities. You're not working on everything, but you're working on those things that are the critical priorities. And I recommend that you set your priorities the night before. That's one of the things that I do, is I set 3 priorities that I want to work on for the next day. And I always try to get those things done, but I also leave room and leave time for the interruptions, because if you don't leave that time and room, then you're not really managing or not really leading your team, right? So you have to leave time for the team, but you also have to get your work done as well. So that's why I say set 3 priorities for yourself. I usually do that the night before. That's saying I'm going to get at least those 3 things done, but I'm also going to leave some time for the team as well.
Darren, when we're talking about mistakes being made, and of course those are opportunities for learning lessons. As a leader, how do you differentiate between what is an acceptable failure and something that is inexcusable and needs accountability added to it?
Yeah, so I think if a person is continuing to make the same mistakes over and over, that's unacceptable, right? Of course, that's unacceptable. A good culture is a failure-friendly culture, meaning that you allow your team to make mistakes, but at the same time, you don't want them making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Accountability is key for preventing mistakes and having those, as Michael said earlier, those crucial conversations so that people understand what the expectations are. You lay those things out clearly, and if they continue to make that same mistake, you're like, hey, we had this conversation. This is unacceptable.
If you were walking into a new team today, how would you communicate that it's a failure-friendly workplace?
I think the first thing that I would do is I would share with the team that, I'm not a perfect person. I haven't done everything right myself. And I may even share some of my failures in my career. I'll share one right now, actually. I was making the move into becoming a senior project manager. I got this role. I didn't really vet the role properly. And so I was in the role for 5 months and ended up getting let go. The first time I was let go of a position, and I was pretty devastated by being let go. But what I found was that my manager, we weren't really a fit for one another. Our values didn't align. We didn't see things eye to eye. And so looking back on it, I'm glad that it happened. It was my first role in becoming a senior project manager. And so then what happened, 5 months later, I found a new senior project management role, and I was managing a contract worth $120 million. And I thought, wow, maybe I had to go through that failure in order to appreciate the success of this next project I was on. It was another senior project management role, but I asked a lot more questions. I was a lot more humble. I set a vision of where I wanted to be. I visualized how I was going to achieve this success. And the failure really humbled me, but it helped me to grow from that failure as well. So I think being willing to share your failures with your team is a powerful connector. Vulnerability is what connects us with people. It's not necessarily my successes that connect me with you, but it's my failures, because you can see yourself in those failures at times, but not staying there, but also saying there is a way out of that. There's a way out of the failure. And I'm going to hold you accountable, but I'm not going to put you down on your first failure. I'm not going to make you feel like, you're a piece of garbage because you failed. I'm going to help you to rise above that failure. And that's why I wrote the book, Rise Above Routine. And I actually have that story that I just shared with you in the book.
Yeah, I would say that everybody on this podcast today has experienced failures. And I know personally that some of my greatest successes have come because of my biggest failures. And, it's such a learning lesson. And, originally I didn't want to talk about my failures, but the people that I have had those conversations with, it's nice to be able to talk about what I learned from that. And so I definitely agree with you. Like I learned a lot from it, and I would much rather share my failure now than, talk about, some of my successes, because you're right. I think it's a lot easier to picture yourself in that failure side of things.
It is. It is. You really connect when someone shares their failure with you. You're like, oh yeah, I see myself in that. But if people just share their successes, you think, oh well, I can never measure up to that person's successes, right? But you kind of create a common ground when you share the failures.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest criticisms of social media is there's a lot of people that only put out the nicest curated version of themselves, and so there's a lot of people that don't realize that that's not real. That's not their real life. Like it's not always happy moments, and that's all you see on social media from a lot of people, and so it causes a lot of problems because they don't show their failures on social media sometimes.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, transparency is so key, James. I think that is, and I try to, in my social media, I do try to be transparent. I try to share my failures, my successes as well. If you're only seen in one way, like you said, you're not a real person. So I think people have to see that authenticity in us. In order to connect with people, you have to see that authentic side of them.
Can you tell us a little bit about the book? What's the core concept behind it, and what would it help somebody if they read it?
Yeah, so Rise Above Routine, it's really about helping people get out of their comfort zones. I share in the book what a comfort zone is. A comfort zone is a familiar and safe place, but it keeps us stagnant. It keeps us stuck, and we don't grow. So I say that in order to grow, you have to get out of the comfort zone. So I share 3 key principles in the book. The first is embracing failure. Failure is not the end point. It is a stepping stone to success. And then I also talk about the importance of being consistent. And consistency is key for lasting change. A lot of people think that, if I just get this big win, everything will be good. But it's that consistent effort over time that really is transformational. And you can see this in a lot of areas. You can see this with money investments. You can see this, as I mentioned earlier, I read 30 minutes a day. That consistency compounds over time. So I talk about consistency. The third thing that I talk about is asking for what you want. Now, this is one of the things that I couldn't do as a 25-year-old. And so now I'm able to teach and help others to ask for the things that you really want. And the more you ask for what you want, the more courageous you are, the stronger you become, the more confident you become. And what I share as well in the book is don't look at necessarily the outcomes. The courage is in the ask. The courage is asking for what you want, not necessarily getting it all the time, but asking. And that's how you develop courage and confidence. And so those are the key things I talk about. I also talk about community in the book as well, and the importance of community, and how when we build community around us, and I talked about the inner circle, and I talk about mentors and those kind of things. When we have a community around us, I would say it helps us to be more resilient as well when we have a community. Resilience is built through community, I would say. When you have a community that you can go and people that you can talk to within that community, you're going to be much more resilient than if you are trying to do it alone. So those are the things that I cover in the book.
Yeah, I would say consistency is so important. We, as leaders, sometimes get into a routine when you aren't propelling yourself towards excellence all the time, and you let yourself get into this routine where you're just going to check the boxes. It's very easy to fall into that habit and not grow yourself and your team.
That's right. That's right.
Can you tell us why so many leaders struggle to ask for help and get those mentors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that question. I think one of the major reasons is history. Could be childhood history. It could be that they were told, that they were stupid, or whatever the messages they were told as a child. Sometimes that carries into adulthood, and people are afraid that they're going to be rejected. And so they don't ask for help, because every time I've asked for help, I haven't been given what I've been asked for, or I haven't been able to get what I've asked for. So that's painful. I'm not going to cross that. I'm not going to ask for help. Right. So, because it's painful. And it's like I said, that could be a childhood thing. I find most of the time it's in the history, and most people have some, what I call fear of rejection, from something that has happened in their past. And that carries into adulthood. And that's what happened to me. It carried into my adulthood, not even realizing it. And as Michael said, it was a blind spot that I didn't even know. But until I got into an environment or a situation that exposed it, I wouldn't have known. But yeah, so I think that's the major reason why, James.
Yeah, I could see that. That's why I don't ask for help sometimes, is because of that fear of rejection. But it's so funny because when you get to a certain point in your career and your life, I can't imagine somebody calling me and asking me for help and me saying, nah, I'm not going to help you. More than anything at this point in my life, if somebody needs help, I would love to. I don't know that I have a lot to offer them, but I will give them everything that I've got.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are like that. Somebody who's coming up in their career, I think if you just ask, you'll be surprised at who will help you and give you advice.
That's such a key point. There's been a lot of young men that have asked me for mentorship, and most of them I say yes to, but there's a lot that said, I wish I would have asked you to be a mentor, but why didn't you? But it's that fear of rejection. I'll share a quick story with you about asking for what you want. Have you ever seen the movie Freedom Writers? Have you seen that movie?
I have not.
You haven't seen the movie. Okay, so it's a movie about a teacher named Erin Grewal, and she's an inner city teacher. And she helps these inner city kids basically get into university. I think it was about 90% of these kids get into university as she became the teacher. Anyway, we watched the movie. I'm a pastor as well. And we watched this movie. My young adult group that I lead, we watched it together. And I said, would it be cool? And I was thinking this to myself, would it be cool if we asked Erin to come and speak to this group? So I reached out to the organization. It was a number of phone calls and emails, and eventually I was able to get her to come and speak to our group. And it was about an hour and a half talk, but it came from asking for what I wanted, right? And I never would have known unless I asked, because we can tell ourselves stories and say, no, that person would never come and do this. I've asked certain people things at times, and you'll be surprised at how many people say yes when you just simply step out and ask the question.
Yeah, I agree. Michael and I have talked about this a little while. I know you write and talk about servant leadership. It's not to put down servant leadership as a concept or anything, but it almost seems like a buzzword and easy answer when people ask what your leadership style is. If somebody asks that question, and should they be giving, like, you think about an interview, like, should you be giving examples of what you mean with servant leadership? Should you combine that with other techniques and tools that you use, or is just saying servant leadership enough?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if people understand what servant leadership really means. It can be a cop-out. Yeah, I'm a servant leader. And sometimes it can be a cop-out because what I mean by that is maybe, you need to be a little bit more direct. And you say, oh, I'm a servant leader, right? So I would say, no. I think servant leadership is really seeing the value in a person and being willing to serve that person and add value to that person. But it doesn't mean that you don't hold the person accountable. So that's not what servant leadership is. Jesus, being one of the greatest servant leaders, he held his team accountable, right? So I think that's where it comes from. I think it's a biblical thing, but servant leadership is really about when you start adding value to people, and you add a lot of value to a person, they're going to start seeing the value in themselves. And I think that's where servant leadership is really, that's where the value of servant leadership come from, is the ability to see the best in a person and bring that out of a person, develop those leaders around you. And one of the things that I've kind of come to understand is leadership is really about developing other leaders. It's easy to develop followers, but to develop leaders is hard. When you develop other leaders, not only are you affecting those leaders that you're developing, you're affecting their whole team. And so that's the importance of, I believe, servant leadership is that development and that empowerment of other leaders.
Yeah, I would agree. Michael, do you see sometimes that as a cop-out answer, as just servant leadership without providing any examples?
Yeah. Thanks for letting me tune in on that. I'm pretty passionate about talking the different styles of leadership. And I was actually presenting at a leadership course yesterday, and we kind of went over a number of different leadership styles. And it's funny to me that the core of servant leadership is the development of others. Far too often, I think people mistake transactional leadership for servant leadership, such as I'll wash your feet, but there is an anticipation that eventually you're going to wash mine. Or if I treat you as an employee a certain way and I'm looking out for you and things, I have an anticipatory thing in my mind that you're going to then perform as a better employee. You're going to, have some sort of result that benefits me on the back end of that. It's more of a transactional approach hidden within servant leadership. True servant leadership is trying to grow people above and beyond even your own skill sets, and without any type of attribute that, hey, you're going to do something for me in return. It's truly giving of yourself, of that servant's heart, and not knowing or anticipating a particular result out of that. I love the fact that we can have this conversation. And what I always encourage leaders to do is have a number of different leadership skill sets. Servant leadership should be definitely a component of what you do, but there's all kinds of different styles of leadership that you should kind of incorporate and blend into your own style to make you a really well-rounded leader.
I agree with you. And there's, like you said, there's so many different styles. Transformational leadership, like you said, servant leadership. There's transactional. There's so many different ways. There's authoritarian, and you need different leadership styles in different situations. Diplomatic leadership is needed, and you need that at certain points, but you also need that direct leadership at certain points as well. Yeah, I agree with you there, Michael.
Darren, you talked a little bit about intentional habits before, and I know on a previous podcast that I listened of yours, I did some deep dive research on you. So you had talked about John Maxwell's rule of 5, and I think you mentioned a couple of things that you do every day. Do you still follow the 5 things that you talked about a couple of years ago on that other podcast?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm doing the same ones, but I think so. I think, one of the things, and I mentioned this already, read every day, reflect every day, write every day. So that's 3. Lead every day, and then there's a 5th one as well. Can't remember what the 5th one is.
The one you cited, and I'm sure you do it every day, is add value to someone every day.
Yes, and add value. Yes, and add value to someone every day. And that can be someone in your family, could be someone on your team, but yeah, find someone to add value to every day. I think that's important, very important. Yeah.
Whether it be those specific 5 or something similar, how important is that for leaders to kind of make a habit about doing things with intentionality every day?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, consistency compounds, right? So if you consistently do something every day, and let's just say you do 5 things every day consistently, where will you be 10 years from now if you did that? I didn't know I would be on this podcast with you, but I started studying and learning leadership 15, 20 years ago. I'm in the leadership position I'm in now, being a leadership coach, because of that daily habit of reading every day. It's one of the things when you build habits, it's hard to deviate from those habits, right? Once you start building like a reading habit or adding value, you just have to do it every day. It's become a habit.
And one other thing that you talked about before that I really appreciated was you were talking about John Maxwell's book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. How important is that? Because we've talked on this program before about communication being very important, but it's not useful if it's not being received because the person doesn't trust you or whatever the other disconnection is. So how important is that to figure out how to connect with everybody around you?
It's essential. It's essential. That book is a great book. Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. I think he says in the book, we speak like some crazy number, like 16,000 words a day or something like that. How many of those words actually connect with the person? And so that's the gist of the messages. We have to find ways to connect with people. And there's some different ways to connect with people. One is listening. Another one is finding common ground. Another one is making eye contact, body language. So finding ways to connect with people is essential, because I can say a lot of words to you, James, and I can sound eloquent and I can sound like I have it all together. But if I'm not making that heart-to-heart connection, you're not hearing me. And that's the whole point of the book is you want people to hear what you have to say. You want to hear what others have to say. You want to make that connection. I'll give a quick example. I have a friend and we've been going for coffee, I'd say for the last 6 years. We connect. I wouldn't be going to coffee with him every month for 6 years if we didn't connect. And the reason we connect is I will say something and he will listen intently to what I have to say and paraphrase back to me what he's heard. And I'll do the same for him. And there's this volley that goes back and forth between me and my friend. So that's what I'm saying. Connection is where you are able to really understand where the other person's coming from.
Yeah, I agree. And for some leaders, step one they need to figure out is step away from their email and put their phone down when they're, having a conversation with somebody.
Definitely.
Before we wrap up, Michael, do you have any high school stories about Darren you'd like to share with us or anything else?
Well, he's just, one of the best running backs I've ever played with. So that's the only thing I'll say. The interesting thing, I think, Darren, we talked a little bit about this and maybe we can have you on again, but you live up in Canada now. I know municipal government probably looks a little bit differently up there in your region. And I don't know how often you get to kind of work in those realms. But, certainly for a lot of our listeners, we're in an environment where most of the people we work with are of servant nature. There are different leadership levels, but they're mostly working to empower and impact communities in a positive way. Maybe we can jump back on here in the future and talk more about how cities are working up there in Canada and maybe take some advice back and forth that we can just empower both regions to where people are enjoying the highest quality of life that they possibly can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, I'll mention this really quickly. Thank you for that, Michael. Just last Friday, our premier, who's like the governor of our province, was speaking. So I went to a Chamber of Commerce event where the premier was speaking. So that was an interesting opportunity to go to and hear the premier. And I was, there in person. So that was an interesting thing.
Darren, we definitely appreciate you being on here. As far as people finding your book or connecting with you on coaching services, how would they do that?
A couple of ways. I have a website. The website is dman, my first initial last name, coaching.com, dmancoaching.com, or they can send me an email, darren@dmancoaching.com.
We'll put that in there. And I'm sure the book's on Amazon and other places.
If they send me an email, I'll give them a link to it. I don't have the link readily available, but
we can put that in the show notes too. So if you'll just send that to me, we'll throw it in the show notes for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And finally, many of our leaders listening to this podcast work in local government. The routine and pressures of public service can sometimes wear people down. If you were sitting across the table from one of our leaders who feels stuck in that routine right now, what advice could you give to them?
I have a number of things that came to my mind, but I think it's one of the things that we talked about, having that support system around you. Get out and talk to someone. Ask for what you need, for what you want. I think that's critical. Yeah, getting out of the comfort zone. We get stuck in ruts and don't even know it. And for me, I had that blind spot and didn't even know I was living in a blind spot. And so, having someone to go and talk to and say, hey, I'm in this place right now. What do you see? And getting that feedback and asking, for the opinions of others. You've been working with me for years. What do you think? How do you think I'm doing in this particular area? Someone that you're close to. And usually people will tell you the truth.
Well, thank you, Darren. Michael, thank you for joining us as well today and sharing both of y'all's insights. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of The Clear Voice, and thank you for what you do in your communities each day. Please give us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. Please follow Clear Career Professionals LinkedIn page to stay on top of the latest career opportunities, and we will catch you next time.